Hey guys, JV here with an Andromeda commentary that I didn't plan on doing. Someone tweeted me about this issue and I decided after a little research that it was worth covering on my channel. Before we start, heads up that I post Andromeda tips and tricks guides, commentary, and my 100% completion streamed playthrough. If any of that content interests you, be sure and subscribe. So the topic for today is about romance and relationship gender options in Andromeda and whether Bioware should be inclusive in those decisions or put creative design and vision first, or a mix of both. Now, as I was looking at this and deciding if I wanted to cover it or not, I came across a lot of flowcharts and different diagrams showing all of the romance options across all of the Mass Effect games, the original trilogy, and all of that. I do want to clarify that this video is focusing on Mass Effect Andromeda because that's the new game that just came out. That's most relevant to our conversation, and that is modern Bioware. They just made Andromeda, and so that is what we're focusing on in this video. I do want to touch on issues in a broad sense first, since I know this will be a pretty hot topic, pretty touchy subject, and some people will disagree with me, some people will agree with me, but I do promise that there will be no pandering here. I'm not worried about sharing my true feelings and honest opinions on this subject. I think what you'll find in this video is that I don't think this issue is black and white, as most issues aren't. There's a whole sea of gray to talk about. You may be watching this video and thinking, why should I even care? Or why are you talking about this? Why is this a big deal? I'm a firm believer in the idea that no one should force or guilt you into caring about a certain issue, especially in the gaming industry. I'm not going to sit here and tell you why you should care about this, why this should be so important in your daily life. We're going to talk about facts, things we know, and also my opinion, since this is my video and I'm making it. If romance options in a video game aren't your concern, you don't care, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. On the flip side, if romance options are a big deal to you, and what I'm talking about right now is very important to you and not others, recognize that others may not share the same very important issues that you do. Overall, if you belong on either side or somewhere in between, I believe in respecting other people's issues. There's nothing wrong with someone who feels passionately about this subject, so don't belittle them because you don't, and don't belittle others for not caring as much as you do. Personally, I'm talking about it because I recognize there are some people out there that genuinely see this as an issue, and it raises some very interesting ideas about video games and choices in RPGs in general. I think this is a really intriguing topic, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need to respect each other when we're talking about touchy subjects like this. I'm not going to be policing the comment section or silencing anybody that I disagree with. I never have done that, and the only reason I will remove comments is if we have personal attacks on other people. But let's try to respect each other's opinions and have a great, meaningful conversation about video games. Here's a bit more information about me and how I play these kinds of games that I think is relevant to this conversation. So, number one, I am a straight male, always have been. That's just me. I tend to play male characters in RPGs and romance females if I have that option. I usually don't edit default characters. I usually pick the default character. I always pick default male shepherd in the original trilogy, and I don't ever feel like I'm hopping into the role of the player, especially if the character is voiced. If the character has a voice, that's that character, and I'm kind of choosing how they go, but I never feel that I'm jumping in their shoes, so I never really feel like I'm role-playing. So to that end, I've never felt like I'm romancing the character. I feel like I'm controlling my character, which is romancing another character. So that is what I bring to this, like it or not, that's me. The main issue, as I understand it, is the lack of male-to-male gay romance options compared to female-to-female lesbian romance options, both of which are less than the heterosexual romance options in Andromeda. As a result, anyone that wants to take a male writer and pursue another male character as a love interest and potential romance option has less options than female-to-female lesbian options or heterosexual romances. So let's look at the facts. How many characters can be romanced per different type of relationship? We do know for sure that in Andromeda, there are 2 male characters that can be romanced as male writer. They are Gil, the engineer that you meet early on, and another character named Reyes, which you meet later in the game. Neither of them can be squad mates, which for some is an issue because you get less dialogue, you get less depth, you know less about the character. The character is less developed, and when you're romancing a character, even if you're not hopping in the role of male writer, you are, forming somewhat of an emotional connection with that character. I'll have more to say about that after we've gone through all these options, but before we jump to female-female lesbian options, we must talk about the Asari. They are a monogender species. There's only one gender within the Asari. Although some do assume male and female roles, they are just a single gender. However, a lot of us identify them as female, and the game even does. By human standards, they do look female, and from a perception standpoint, the animations, their tone of voice, anatomically on the outside, they certainly do look female to us. And the problem is we're not sure if they have female sex organs. They are an alien race, so I don't know why they would have human female sex organs, but they do mate and reproduce with each other as well as other species. And when they do decide to do that with another species, the result, the kid, is another Asari, which I find really interesting. So, you can speculate on what's down there, what kind of female sex organs there are. I believe Liara references something specific in the original trilogy. I can't remember exactly, but if they're making babies, then the babies have to come out somehow. So really, all we have is speculation, but personally, I consider the Asari a wild card. I lean towards neither male or female because of the lore and universe of the game and what the Asari consider themselves. They are a monogender species. There's only one gender. However, I can think of many reasons why you would think, no, the Asari should be considered female when we're talking about romance options, because I believe they are considered attractive across all races in the game. I mean, you have Asari dancers in Korra's Den on Omega, for example. They also share many outer anatomical similarities with the human female. If you take away the blue skin color and the tentacles on the back, you essentially have on the outside a human female. So I can certainly understand that perspective. So bringing all of that back to the female-female lesbian romance options conversation, when you're talking about this and counting, do you include Asari in the female romance options with a female writer? Or a male writer for that matter? It doesn't matter, and that's a question, by the way. Let me know in the comment section below how you feel about including Asari in this romance option mix. Because of the monogender technicality, personally, it's hard for me to include them in either. I would say they're just that wild card, and I wouldn't call them necessarily a female romance option. But again, I can see why some people would, and another great reason is because when an Asari does mate with another species, for example, a human, so one of the writers, either gender, then the Asari would be considered the female. If they were to mate and then produce an offspring, the one who gives birth, again, that's going to be the Asari, is going to consider themselves a female. So if you do count Asari in this mix for female-female lesbian options, then you have 4 options in Andromeda. That's Suvi, Vetra, PB, and Carrie. Of course, if you don't count Asari and you want to remove them from the mix because they're a wild card, then there are only 2 options. That would be Suvi and Vetra. So when comparing these numbers to the male-male gay options, obviously, the way you look at Asari really does matter when you're looking at the numbers. It's either gay and lesbian writers both have 2 options each individually, or if you're counting Asari, there's a little bit more for the lesbian female writer. Now let's shift towards comparing these numbers to the heterosexual options. So as a male writer, you have 5 female character options for romance, 2 of which are Asari. Those are Korra, Vetra, Avella, PB, and Carrie. As a female writer, we have 3 male character romance options. That's Liam, Jal, and Reyes. Also, before we move on, I do want to point out that 4 characters are bisexual. That's PB, Vetra, Reyes, and Carrie. All of them will go for either a male or a female writer. So let's go ahead and go down the list and recap all of the grand total of options. We've got 2 male writer gay options. We have 4 female writer lesbian options, 5 male writer heterosexual options, and 3 female writer heterosexual options. From just looking at this, we learn that there are slightly more heterosexual options than homosexual options in the entire game. That is just fact. There are more female lesbian options than female heterosexual options, which I thought was interesting, and I think that's simply because there are Asari in the game, and Asari are that wild card. Again, if I were to take them out of the grand tally list, then things would look differently, but just for the sake of this video, we're going to include them. Objectively, we can also say that there are less male options in any scenario, no matter if you're playing a male gay writer or a female heterosexual writer. Again, I think the balance tips in that way because we have the Asari. We don't have an all-male counterpart race to balance them out with these options. That's quite enough counting for now. Let's move on to why people care, why this is a big issue. And 2 things I see generally from people that are upset about this is people want to know why or why not Bioware. Why do you arbitrarily choose this many options for this kind of relationship versus another? People want to know if this is arbitrary or deliberate. Is it a conscious decision to include more heterosexual options than homosexual options, specifically with the gay homosexual writer? All around, people don't seem to have facts for these issues. They don't seem to have evidence where Bioware deliberately made this decision either way. This reminds me of the whole Bioware hates women and they made no attractive characters because they wanted to make them all ugly because they hate women. I don't even want to get into that in this video, although I will say there are two very specific issues that I completely understand from gay players why they would think this is an issue. Number one, I've heard that gay romance scenes themselves are not nearly as detailed as the heterosexual ones. I have not seen a single romance scene so far because I'm playing through the game blind, and not all hetero scenes have full scenes. You know, some of them do cut to black fairly quickly, but none of the gay scenes do. None of them go further, and they're not as detailed as some of the heterosexual scenes, which I do see kind of being upsetting for some people. Number two, I mentioned before that gay players don't have a squad mate option. Gil is a secondary character, I would say, definitely not someone that you can experience the story with and shoot bad guys with, and then Reyes I would call a tertiary character. The point is, there is a lack of depth. There is not nearly as much to know about Gil or Reyes as there is for some of the heterosexual and lesbian options. There just isn't. And so this may go against what I'm about to say about inclusivity, but purely from a sympathetic view and standpoint, I can certainly understand why this is a problem for people, for gay players. They want to be able to experience the same depth as other players, and they can't. So I can certainly sympathize with parts of this argument, parts of this issue and problem. I do think that the number of romances is purely a subjective matter, and I don't believe that's a reason to be upset with Bioware. But let's talk about getting upset with Bioware, because I do have a problem with some of the methods. As always, when people are upset, some people go off the deep end and start targeting specific developers, which I am not okay with. It's okay to get mad at an organization that employs a certain developer, but I am not on board with witch hunting whatsoever. No matter what your background or preferences are or viewpoints, I think there's several different ways to look at this. The first one is that Bioware should favor inclusivity and make sexual preferences as broad as possible to allow for player choice. I think there's a broad spectrum of reasons why Bioware would favor inclusivity, and they range anywhere from fan desires, like, hey, as fans of Mass Effect, we'd like more gay romance options, all the way to, and devolving to, virtue signaling, which would be like, we want these gay options just to show that we are inclusive and we're an inclusive company. And I would find, obviously, virtue signaling very disingenuous. It's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because already, believe it or not, people are complaining about diversity and how Bioware handled the only transsexual character in the game. If there were more homosexual options in this game for gay or lesbian characters, I am confident that there would be some kind of hit piece by some journalist who would say, oh, Bioware is trying to be inclusive for the sake of being inclusive. It really is a double-edged sword, and you can't get it right these days. Back to the idea of a spectrum of intention from Bioware, I do think at the most innocent level, fan desires is a perfectly reasonable reason to have more romance options. If they collect fan feedback and truly do, apply it to the game in some ways and not in others, then you could think, hey, we looked at feedback, we wanted more of this, so we added it into the game. But that is certainly a slippery slope, and we cannot gauge the intention of Bioware because we don't know the intention, and anyone that tells you otherwise is flat out lying. So on this point, I think that inclusivity is a very slippery slope, and I'm not sure that Bioware can choose a right decision on that. Another perspective on this is creativity, creative design, decision, vision, something that isn't necessarily intentional. And when Bioware is writing and designing a certain character, would the character have an inherent preference based on their background, their history, whatever else that they're including in the character? And I certainly understand that they could write that in, but is that going back to the inclusivity for the sake of inclusivity thing? I think only the writer knows whether decisions to make a character gay, bi, straight, whatever it may be, are genuine or not. Seriously, only the writer knows, and I know that's not a solution necessarily, and that doesn't get us any further, but it's certainly true. Only the writer knows if this is a creative decision or an intentional decision. If it's arbitrary based on whatever they came up with their mind and whatever the rest of the team came up with, or if it's planted in there on purpose. Yet another way to look at this is how much of an RPG is Mass Effect? How much role-playing are you doing? And I think a lot of people, when they bring up this point, like to correlate the amount of choices and freedom in other parts of the game to the romance. If you're able to do this, this, and this in other parts of the game, why can't you have a maximum amount of options with your romances? I've always thought of Mass Effect as an action RPG, but just talking about this makes me question whether it's even an RPG in this respect at all, because even with the original trilogy, we always had Shepard. We were just playing different shades of Shepard based on his dialogue. He'd be hardcore, a little more to the point, renegade, versus, you know, sympathetic, whatever, Paragon. Now we have Ryder, female or male. And Ryder, across the board, no matter which tonal choices you make, is fairly lighthearted about things. Ryder likes to joke around. That's just that character. And compare that to an RPG where you don't have a voiced protagonist and you are truly able to have a broad spectrum of what kind of character that you are role-playing. With that line of thinking and the idea that Mass Effect is less of an RPG than other really hardcore RPGs that allow you to step into the role of the player, should the amount of choices and freedom in other parts of the game correlate to romance? And for the most part, I think they do. We do have the main 4 types of romance. I don't know if you can extend that further or not, but you have heterosexual, male, female, and then homosexual, lesbian, and gay. We do have those options, but the amount, it's the number that people are a bit worried about. Should that correlate with the choices and freedom in other parts of the game? It's a genuine question. I'd like to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Another way of thinking about this, and I don't necessarily agree with this thinking, it's very black and white, is that there should be proportionate options based on the real world. The percentage of LGBT population in the world should directly correlate and align with the percentage of LGBT romance options in the game. And I believe if you apply this logic, then LGBT romances are actually overrepresented. But there's a problem with this. Since we're dealing with aliens and different cultures, we're way in the future. We have no idea what even human culture is going to be like. It's sort of difficult to make this argument. Sure, the game came out in 2017. We can only work with history and what we know and fiction and stuff like that. But again, the game takes place far in the future. We can't predict what human cultural norms are going to be in terms of sexual orientation. Another issue is with sample size. We only have 14 different romance options in Andromeda, and this is a very small subsection of people that we've met that might be overrepresented in one way, underrepresented in another. And when we're comparing this to a world population in 2017, there's just a lot of issues with this line of thinking. So I don't think it's this black and white. So the 4 lines of thinking that I could come up with when addressing this issue were, whether they should favor inclusivity, creative decision and vision, how much of an RPG Mass Effect is, and also the proportionate options that we just talked about. Obviously, there are more ways of thinking and looking at this issue. So if you can think of more ways to address this, please share in the comment section below. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. To wrap up this video, I'm going to share my honest opinions on this subject. And as someone who creates content, obviously not on the level of a video game, just not even close in terms of creativity and skill and technical, whatever you want to say, but as someone who likes to think of themselves as a creative person, I can't in good conscience be inclusive for the sake of inclusivity. Like I said, I think that's just disingenuous, and I think it's borderline virtue signaling, which is something I'm strongly against. I believe that everyone has their own creative process. Everyone is inspired by different things in their lives, and however you bring that inspiration together into a creative piece of work is your thing. When you're speculating on things of this degree and this nature, I usually apply Occam's razor. I think it's more likely that Bioware creates characters for a variety of other reasons instead of intentional and nefarious and malicious reasons. There's too many assumptions to get to that conclusion, and we can't assume either way, honestly, without looking like an ass. I don't think we can say that Bioware is neglecting gay romance options. I think there is something to be said for the fact that we should have a gay squad mate so that players can connect more deeply and have that depth with them. I also think we can look at the romance scenes and think, why aren't these as detailed as the other ones? And so in those ways, I think people have a right to be upset and should voice their concerns to Bioware in an appropriate way, not witch hunting, which is so easy in the age of social media and all of this garbage that we can just peddle around without facts. At the core of this, I believe there's a correlation causation issue. Just because we found this pattern doesn't mean that it is intentional. So now that we've laid it all out, do I believe there is a solution to this issue? I do not, because you can't gauge the intention of Bioware and you can't make assumptions without evidence and something to prove your point. No matter what, some people are going to be upset when a game is brave enough, when a franchise and a company is brave enough to approach something like romance in a video game. Think about that. It's not in a lot of video games, not in this system, and it's not an impressive, robust system. It's not simulating real romance in any, scenario. But we do have a level of nudity and intimacy that you don't see in a lot of video games out there. I believe this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation for Bioware. They can't win. Somebody is going to complain no matter what. I just know this is going to be a very polarizing video, so please let me know your true, honest-to-goodness thoughts in the comment section below. Again, as always, I'm not going to remove any comments if you disagree with me or someone else, only if you start personally attacking someone. So please respect each other and share your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.